But interestingly enough, the threats come at the top and the bottom of thinking. And here's what I mean by that. So we now have our AI forward composition program where we teach our students how to write using artificial intelligence tools. But as part of that, we do two things. The drafting process is done by artificial intelligence, but the initial outlining, we teach them to do very, very, very detailed outlines. Essentially, you have to come up with your own main idea, your own thesis. You do your own research, and then you put that research in the outline where you want it. And you tell on the sentence level what you want the AI to do. And as we'll often say, it's important that the robot works for the human. The human doesn't work for the robot. And so if a student puts in a prompt and the robot spits out some essay or something, and then they turn it in, they're just turning in the robot's work. They're now essentially working for the robot. They have given up their very thinking itself for the robot, right? So the artificial intelligence, when we're using it, we're teaching them at the very, very beginning of the process to prompt it with very detailed outlines. So, for example, my talk today, I developed using one of Anthropic's products called. I use Claude for this one. And why did I? But you can already tell immediately. There are a lot of old man references in it. A lot of things to life before the World Wide Web, when only a few, in the 1980s, only a few nerds like me were even using the internet at all. So you can tell that was not generated by an AI. It would have much more current things than a lot of the things that I want to talk about. And as part of the English language dominance issue, I had to tell it to think about the pillars of the show. It would not think of those things automatically on its own. So the first part is, the threat to all of us is we need to make sure that we are telling the AI what to write in a very specific and detailed way. The other side of that is the voice issue. And what I mean by that is, we all know it, you see something that someone's turned in that's produced by an artificial intelligence, and even if they've written a very thorough outline, you know the voice of an AI is not the voice of an AI. If you hand me a document that's produced by someone who has written who has turned an AI essay to me, I can almost always tell not just that it's written by AI, but all the way to knowing which particular AI they've used to write that one. And it doesn't have my voice. Now, in my case, I've published hundreds of thousands of words of my own writing long before artificial intelligence. And so I already have an established voice, both a scholarly voice and other kind of voice. And if you want to train an AI to talk like me, you can do a pretty good job of doing that, because there's so much of me out there. But if you're 20 years old, you've not written nearly as much as I have. You simply have not had enough opportunity. Now your voice is being pushed down by, well, I'll just use the AI voice. That is in the short term, I think, a problem. Now, I actually think in the long term that will be less of a problem. What I mean by that is, I think people will very quickly come to crave the human voice and immediately recognize the AI voice when you hear it and be turned off. So, if I get a telephone call on my phone, I answer it, and it's a robot, no matter how realistic that voice is, within about 5 seconds I know it's a robot, and I just turn it off. That same message brought to me by a human, I want to be more courteous to the human, right? And so I would not just turn off my phone at that point. So we're going to be adapting to these things. It is going to be something that we will have to fight for. And I think critical thinking, we always talk about critical thinking as a skill, that is going to become even more important. It already has become even more important for all of us, and especially for those people who are growing up only having artificial intelligence. So I know I'm filibustering you, but we're waiting for Julia. So just one, I would like to make one point. If you look at major social changes that have occurred globally, you always see 2 years, 2008 and 2013. Next time you see some kind of social science that demonstrates there's been some change in the behavior or attitudes or what it is of young people, you'll see the two demarcation points of 2008 and 2013. Why those years are important? The release of the iPhone in the first year that the iPhone, the children who grew up with iPhones are entering the school, and thus have the attitude of their entire experience mediated through this. Sabi, did you have
No, not to follow, but I think I'm with you, Richard, because I'm one of those parent academic. I think I'm not really happy for this AI taking over the brain of people, and it's too concerning me, because dealing with the situations of a student submitting the whole assessment written by, the robot. You said your language is not using their thinking or brain or ideology, so that's been so challenging. So that's just good to have the same thoughts, and how we can actually let our next generations young people to use their own brain more than relying on robot. I mean, our education system. That's what I was thinking. So I think we're in the same place. Thank you.
Yeah, and I would just add to that, like what we have to say about our students is also true for us. If you're entering graduate school today, you're entering trying to use AI tools to help you with your research. And immediately you can see the potential problems of them just feeding you the same 8 articles over and over again. One hallucination, one error in one AI gets replicated over and over. All right, so my old friend here. This is full of friends here for me today. We have the question: how do AI-driven romantic companionship impact human social relationship, emotional well-being, and perceptions of intimacy in digital age? He's asked about AI girlfriends. So we actually already have a lot of data on this before AI girlfriends, and that is because we've had internet-mediated relationships for a long time. This has been going on for a while, and we've seen that it's been a very, very great problem around the world. It has been a problem. So the result of, and so what we're seeing in any country that has a great deal of access to technology, what we're seeing is this, we often call it this epidemic of loneliness, this inability for young people to interact, even on the friendship level, but even more difficultly to interact with people on the people romantically. So, for example, I remember my son was in the Boy Scouts, and we would all gather together. The Boy Scouts would gather together, and they'd do camping and that kind of stuff. And the only thing that they talked about were the computer games that they played together, but separately. And as soon as the events were over, they would split up to go out to other places so they could immediately play together while isolated. Right? That's on the friendship level. Now, I can tell you that most of those boys today who are now grown men are lonely. Most of them are not in relationships with girls. Most of them are not able to form those things because they never even they never even gathered those skills as children for friendships, let alone for romantic relationships. AI is only going to exacerbate that and create. It's just so much easier. If I have an AI girlfriend, she's never going to contradict me. She'll always be there when I want her to be there. Every attitude that I have, she'll reflect back to me, and it will feel easy. And there'll be no friction in my life. And the problem is, this will make it even harder for me to deal with an actual romantic relationship with a non-AI girlfriend, who then has her own beliefs and attitudes and ideas. I'm imagining I'm not the only person here who's been married. So, when you have a spouse, regardless of how you met, you might be one in some ways, but you are two people in other ways as well. And you quickly learn that you are not the greatest person in the world because someone else has to deal with you, and that person is also not the greatest person in the world either. But it's very important for your own character formation to learn how to do those things. So I think it's actually going to be a big problem. And I'm in the humanities, but if I were in the social sciences, that I think is going to be a boom area of study over the next decade, for sure. Just to see the outcomes. I think it's a real potential problem. Obviously, there are elements of it that are positive, right? The positive elements of it are the other ability to meet people who you might not be able to meet with otherwise, right? Go back 20 years, and unless you had an auntie who knew that person's family, you were not meeting that person, right? They had to be in your class for you to have a family connection, right? Now, it does create other opportunities, but with those opportunities also comes risks.
Thank you so much, Professor.
If there are no other questions and if there is a time, can I just add on and throw another bomb, tell some Professor notes about this relationship that we're talking about and the social skills? I also see the problem and risks is the language as well, because language is really important in social skills and relationship as well. What I see, because I am from social science and I do some, gender relationship research as well. The other problem we're seeing because of all this, the AI, what is the language that was used is the AI girlfriend, is the people, especially in masculine sense I'm talking about, is being more violent and traumatic, then more accommodating and loving and caring, and that's in globally what we're seeing in the rise in not only in cyber abuse, but more the emotional abuse and more incompetent relationship, even if when they would like to have relationships with. So I think it's a really, I'm scared of this all things, because we experience some from our own way as well, even knowing and researching about it, but it makes people more vulnerable than supportive. And I think the solution is, I don't know, because there is really very less about social these days. As Professor Mox gives example of iPhone, people tend to go in their phone even when other person is around and having in-person conversations, because maybe sitting on the dinner table, but most likely everyone in their phone rather than the conversations, which helps to build the language and social skills and how to talk to each other. So that's all I was going to talk there, but just to continue the conversations if there is anything else.
Someone named Soham has a question.
Yeah, Professor, can you hear me? Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, let me just try to turn on the video. Do you see me? Okay. Hi. Hello. Hi, Professor. Thank you so much for that really, really interesting presentation. Um, since I am a research scholar, one of the things that I have to constantly contend with is because research is a creative process, and like you mentioned, it also involves critical thinking. Do you think there is a middle ground that is to be reached between, let's say, a judicious usage of AI tools and the act of performing research? Like, is there any middle ground that is to be reached? Because as I see with my peers, I am someone who's personally aversive to the usage of AI tools, but there are certain times I cannot help but fall back upon them for the sake of convenience. So I would really like to hear your perspective on that. Yeah.
So, in the 15th century, the movable type printing press was developed in Germany, and it quickly spread all over, starting in Europe, but it went everywhere. Sure you've used movable type in your life. You've read a book. And so, but what was interesting was when the movable type printing press came out, there was a lot of angst about it because of the skills that would be lost. Skills that would be lost, and how manuscripts in the future would not be individual, intricate, potential works of art, and would instead be mass-produced sameness. And the truth is, that did happen. That did happen. So, this book here is exactly the same as every other book in this printing. There's nothing special about this book, as opposed to, by chance, I pulled Beowulf, which there's only one copy of in the world in manuscript. So even though it's not a beautiful one, it is in and of itself something of great value, something of great importance. Whereas if I threw this book in the trash right now, the world would lose very, very little, because there are thousands and thousands and thousands of this book, exactly the same. If there's a typo in it, it's on the same page every day. But of course, what other things happened? Well, new things emerged. So the novel, there was no such thing as a novel before you get the printing press, because it simply was not possible to produce those things at an economic scale. You suddenly had the possibility for universal education. The reason people weren't educated universally before that was not because the authorities were trying to keep them down. Rather, because there was simply no, it was too expensive. It's the same reason I don't have a pilot's license. It's not that the government doesn't want me to fly a plane, it's that I don't have enough money to buy a plane. And it would be useless for me to get a pilot's license, and no one's going to help me do that. I guess if I really want to, I could, but it would be a useless thing. And so what happens is new things emerge. And so I do think that there is not a middle ground, I would say. I wouldn't say like there's a good and bad, but rather there are ethical ways and effective ways of using these tools. Ever since the first man took a stick to poke something, a meter away from him, and thus technologically extended his arm by 1 meter, right? Ever since that happened, we have been finding ways to either use that stick to cook our food over fire, or to hit someone over the head with it. There are all those things, and so I would actually not think so much about questions about this idea of the middle ground, but rather, okay, what is the ethical way to do this? What is the effective way? So for example, on the education side, I know this is more about humanities and social sciences, but we have a lot of educators here. On the education side, what we really focus on is what we call authentic assessment. What are you trying to assess these students? If you're trying to get them to memorize things, they can't use AI. That's no good, right? But there are some skills that it doesn't matter if they use AI because you're trying to test them on something that's at a higher level. And so as long as you're using it as a tool and not being used by your tool, right? As long as you're the boss of the robot and the robot's not the boss of you, that's a really good heuristic for thinking, am I doing this right? That would be my opinion. Now, I will say this is rapidly changing. So, first of all, you can find a lot of people who know as much or more than me who disagree with me on that. And also, if you come back and ask me again in a year, I might have a different answer for you. But that's my answer to that.
Thank you so much, Professor. Yeah, really, really interesting insight because, yeah, I mean, the point you mentioned about the stick, I mean, that makes a lot of sense. And that analogy, I believe, will continue to hold in conversations like these. Thank you so much. Thank you.
Any more questions?
I saw Julius pop in. Hey.
Okay. So I guess we can proceed. And thank you so much, Dr. Nose, and for giving us an insightful and valuable lectures and giving us insights. And we shall now proceed to the second keynote address. So please join us again in welcoming Julius Bamudu Raki. He's an assistant lecturer and examinations coordinator in the Department of Literature and Film Studies, Kiambogo University, Kampala, Uganda. And today he will be giving his speech on the topic of female agency and patriarchal subversion in the African novel, reading Lola Shoneyen's The Secret Lives of Baba, Saji's Wives. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, you're audible.
Okay, thank you so much. And I want first of all apologize for coming in late. And it's a season for Uganda Matters Days. It's on the 3rd of June, and the city normally gets crowded with people all over the country and even across the East African region. So I got hit in jam. I got this organization. I had to come here in my office. This is where the network is much more stable. And also reaching here, I find there is no power around, so we are experiencing some power outages. But I hope it's all going to be okay. Shakespeare says all is well that ends well. And let me try to see how I can connect my presentation so that I get started. I hope I'm still clear.
Yes, we can hear you.
Yeah, I'm trying to connect my presentation so that I can get this right going. Oh, sorry. Sorry. I'm just trying to see how I connect it, and so that I don't delay you any further. Okay. It looks like I'm having trouble on how to connect, but can I give an audio view of this presentation? Maybe I can send a PowerPoint later on.
Yes, you can.
All right, thank you so much, and sorry, I apologize for that. So I want to thank you so much for this kind invitation. I also want to thank my current keynote address colleague and my good friend, Professor Knox, Richard Scott. And I want to thank you so much. And my presentation is majorly, as already been introduced by the MC, female agency and patriarchal subversion in the African novel. Reading Lola Shoneini's The Secret Lives of Babasegi's Wives. So this is an African text and one of the emerging texts. It's won so many awards, and as we're going to find out. And maybe before I go further, the question of patriarchy and the African novel, very, very important. So I am introducing to one of the most illustrious creative writers in the contemporary African literary tradition, and this is a Nigerian, Lola Shonein. Her full name is Tilola Atinuku Alexandra Shonein, but I think she chooses to use the short term of those lengthy names as Lola Shonein, and so that's how we know her. She was born on the 25th of February 1974 in Ibadan, that's southwestern Nigeria, to Chief Tunwoye Shonein, and the mother is Yetunde Shonein. And the records indicate that she is the youngest and only girl in a family of 6 children. Of course, this is common in Africa, where we are normally many. It's very rare to find an African family where there will be few children, because children are so much revered in the African tradition. She received her primary education from the UK, and she specifically attended the primary education at Cagfield School in Edinburgh, that's Scotland. She holds a Bachelor of Arts with Education degree from Ogun State University in Nigeria. Although her marriage did not last long, her first marriage, I think she first married, and that marriage did not last long. But she has since gotten married to Olakun Soyinka, and this is a medical doctor and son of the amazing Nobel laureate Wale Soyinka. I'm very sure you've all heard about Soyinka. He's the 1986 Nobel Prize winner in literature, and we now see that she's currently living in Lagos, in Nigeria, with her family, and I think she has 4 children, 2 boys and 2 girls. Now, her position, of course, in African literature by critical acclaim, Lola Shonein is one of the contemporary African formidable literary voices, especially as a poet, novelist, short fiction, and children's author, whose humor and feminist passion, among other endearing literary qualities, have won her the prestigious PEN Award, that's in the United States of America, and the Ken Saro-Wiwa Prize for Prose Fiction, and that's an award I think given in Nigeria. And in 2010, she was shortlisted for the Orange Prize in the UK for her debut novel, The Secret Lives of Babasegi's Lives, which is of course going to be my major area of discussion. The Brito Paper, which is an online magazine that supports creative writers, African creative writers in the English language, selected her as Africa's Literary Person of the Year in 2017. And she's a formidable writer. She has written serious works of literature, majorly on African concerns, especially domestic affairs, in her novels, short stories, poetry, and children's literature. So that's who she is, a Nigerian and a very formidable artist in the contemporary African literary circles. Okay, now, before I go further, I just want you, because probably for those who have not, in case you've not yet read The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives, why I chose it, I just want to give you a brief synopsis of what it is. So, published in 2010, The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives is Lola Shoinaeni's debut novel that offers a captivating examination of the complexity of the patriarchal African concept of polygamy. So that's a major thing, the African concept of polygamy. The idea in Africa that a man, for someone to be man enough, then he should be married to more than one wife. So now that complexity, and the good thing is, I come from a polygamous family, so that's the sort of story that I can be able to put myself in and fit in. Now, focus is on the domestic life of Mr. Atanda Alao, a famously known simply as Baba Segi. Now, Baba Segi, I think this Baba means, in most African languages, Baba, including I think even in Swahili, Baba means the father. So Baba Segi means the father of Segi. And but we know his full name, his real name is Mr. Atanda Alao. But we know him, I think the narrator talks him more about as Baba Segi. And of course, his 4 wives, Iya Segi, and also now Iya becomes like the opposite. So Baba is the father and Iya is the mother. So Iya Segi, that's what it means, the mother of Segi, Iya Femi, Iya Tope, and Mrs. Blandley. And now Mrs. Blandley is a very young and a recent university graduate. And she's the youngest, and of course, through whom the title secrets into the complexity, into the complex dynamics of Baba Segi's households later get revealed to us. So this is a captivating tale of the concept of polygamy, and especially centering on the story of Mr. Atanda Alao, or now the one I'm calling Baba Segi, and of course his 4 wives, as I've mentioned then. So he has already 3. But he has recently married a young and beautiful university graduate. And through this young university graduate, we now get to learn the secrets, as of course the title suggests, of this household and how they are revealed to us. Now, fast forward, essentially, and especially from the vantage point of feminism, and this should probably be from the vantage point of radical feminism. The novel offers a radical appeal to women in polygamous marriages, especially those with infertile husbands, either cheat or produce children out of wedlock, or just leave the marriage relationship altogether. So that's, I think, from a feminist angle. So the novel is sort of like advising women, because now, since the idea that in the African concept of polygamy is so complicated, that even if, for example, the man is not able to execute his duties as a man in the family, so women are, according to this, women are free to cheat on the husband. For example, if the husband is impotent or if he's infertile, produce children, she doesn't have to walk away. She can't keep in there, but she must see how she survives. And one way she does that is if, for example, she begets children out of wedlock, or if she's not even happy, as of course happens with the new wife, Lola Blandley, she should actually walk out of the relationship altogether. So that's the most radical appeal it offers to women, especially those who feel so much subjugated by the concept of polygamy as a major aspect of patriarchy in Africa. So that's what the novel is. Now, I just want to discuss the concept of patriarchy, but there are other key terms that we want to define, and including, of course, patriarchy. So there are very many definitions of patriarchy, I'm very sure, as you can all attest, but I was very much intrigued, and I sort of like landed on Alda Fascio's definition. This is in 2013. So he looks at the patriarchy as a form of mental, social, spiritual, economic, and political organization or structuring of society produced by the gradual institutionalization of sex-based political relations created, maintained, and reinforced by different institutions linked closely together to achieve consensus on the lesser value of women and their roles. These institutions interconnect not only with each other to strengthen the structure of domination of men over women, but also with other systems of exclusion, oppression, and or domination based on real perceived differences between humans. And this creates, of course, a state that responds only to the needs and influence of powerful men. So in short, of course, as we all know, so patriarchy refers to a social code that is believed to promote undue male privilege and dominance, while it's at the same time engendering the utter marginalization of women and girls. So that's the concept of patriarchy as we know it. So this one, I felt this looks at it much more direct. Then of course, I have, in addition to patriarchy, I have female agents, because that's I'm interrogating those two variables: patriarchy, female agency, and of course the question of subversion. So female agency, on the other hand, of course, as we know, basically refers to a female's ability, willingness, and determination to act and make their own decisions for their own good, perhaps in sharp contrast with the traditionally held notion of females being merely weak, submissive, and passive in patriarchal African societies. So the idea that women should not just sit back and look on as society sort of like unleash almost all the havoc against them is what the concept of female agency is. So the women's capacity or ability, either as individuals or a group, to make purposeful choice and action is now what I consider a female agency, of course, which is other people's views. And then, of course, in addition to female agency, I think before I go to the major discussion of the text, now I look at the idea now of subversion. Okay, and the subversion, the act of trying to destroy. Of course, the Cambridge Dictionary offers a definition of subversion: the act of trying to destroy or damage an established system of government. So in this particular discourse, I'm using the word subversion, essentially mean the women's actions, whether conscious or subconscious, that mastermind the eventual defeat, overthrow, and dissemination of the patriarchal order, thereby leaving chauvinistic man utterly helpless and pitiful, as of course I'm going to illustrate in my discussion of the text. So in other words, I'm debunking the over-cliched narrative that patriarchy makes man remotely indispensable, especially with the machinations and schemes of assured woman. So subversion. So what do the women do in the Sacred Lives of Baba Segi's wives that make the whole system, which seems apparently to privilege men at the expense of women, come down crumbling? Because towards the end of the text, we're going to find that this domineering, chauvinistic, flashy Baba Segi is no more, is actually later on found out, and patriarchy subsequently falls. And that's, I think, what now I'm going to illustrate in here. Okay, so now, after looking at those three terminologies, so patriarchy, female agency, and of course the downfall of this particular system, and I first of all want to illustrate instances of patriarchy and patriarchal oppression in this particular text. And my argument is that although the novel, The Sacred Lives of Baba Segi's Wives, is in one way a feminine celebration of female agency, especially in its successful toppling of the existing patriarchal system, as of course I'm going to illustrate a little bit later after this one, it also paints a very dire situation in which womanhood and the whole idea of femininity are almost synonymous with nothingness. So according to this text, Shonain Lola depicts the idea of being a woman, or being a woman. This could also be a wife, or even a female child. This should be a girl, as almost being equal to nothing. So women's voices in this particular society of Baba Segi's lives, in that world of Baba Segi's lives, is simply, they don't matter. So women are sort of like at the periphery order of things. And so the situation is also bad for them. And probably this is what justifies the idea that these women should actually come up and topple this very oppressive patriarchal system. So Shonen depicts various instances of patriarchal subjugation of Nigerian women, and indeed, I think by extension, African women, could even be Ugandan women, probably also women elsewhere, could be Indian women, those who are struck, or those who find themselves at the receiving ends of a very unhelpful and repressive system, which now seems to privilege the man over women on the bare basis of just gender, and so on and so forth. And so the various instances he points include, for example, there are issues of early and forced marriages of women and also girls. And this, of course, points to the glaring power imbalances and the patriarchal instituted passivity of the female gender in very important social matters. And in one area, of course, you find in chapter 9, especially, the version I was reading does not have titles, so I probably could be referring to chapters, and maybe when I'll send this particular stuff, people can be able to look at it later on and read for themselves. But in chapter 9, one of Babasegi's wives, I think the third, called Iyatope, is forced into a marriage to compensate for her father's poor agricultural crop yields. So I think Babasegi is a very rich man, and I think the tradition here is that rich men would move all over society and then try to get people who probably were not well economically, and then engage them and sort of like make them squatters on their own land. So they pay them upfront, and finally the payment is made that you till the land, you put their crops, and whatever you do does not belong to you. The harvest will be gotten by another person, the rich person. So you see that exploitation comes in here. So the father of Iyatope, unfortunately, the yields do not come well. And so Babasegi has to go back and ask for his money. When he goes there, he's going to be told stories of how the harvest has not been that nice. He's going to lose it. And of course, they have struck a deal. And one way you do this now is that since Iyatope's father has so many children, they are beautiful girls, then they should strike a deal rather than pay the money now that he can't pay the poor yields, even the poor harvest. It should be now one of the children should be traded off. Okay, and so there's that trading off, in which now Iyatope is going to get married to a man who's very, very older than her, and most importantly, she's not going to be given a chance to even have a debate. So everyone thinks that's how it should be, the mother inclusive, the father, and the brothers. So she's forced into that marriage. And we also told, of course, the father in that narrative, the father also reveals, sort of like castigates Iyatope before she gets married to Babasegi, that why isn't she having men? Given that the sister, who of course is younger than her, already has suitors, all gotten for her. So it is that idea in this patriarchal Nigerian society in which girls and women do not really have a say when it comes to the question of who they should get married. And yet marriage is a big thing. You really need to have your own ideas. You need to see how this works out, because marriage, as we all know it, is not always a bed of roses. And then, so we also have the idea, for example, how women are denied the right to inherit property, including land, thereby making them economically dependent on men. And so it's only, this is a man's world. Women have no say. Everything belongs to the woman, and the man only, the woman can only play second fiddle. It's just like a servant, a domestic servant. And when it comes to the question of property and inheritance, it's not actually part of the deal, because traditionally in most African societies, women were looked at as visitors, and the marriage, I think, is what they looked for. And the belief was that as a woman, a female child grows up, she now gets a suitor. She'll be married, of course, far away from home, and so she ceases to belong to that particular society. And so the idea of being an heiress, for example, inheriting property, doesn't seem to make sense in the entire thing. So that's why women are not part of it. So all the women we see here, all their prospects are simply seen in a marriage where, first of all, they don't even have a say, where they even are going to be so much subjugated, as we find, of course, in this particular aspect of it. So we also have the idea where women and children are subjected to very grotesque and gross domestic violence and abuse. So in as much as this particular part of Nigeria in Africa celebrates polygamy, the idea, because polygamy is a big thing, and of course there are debates, especially in the West, in Europe and the entire West, regarding the polygamy, the idea that you should be, of course, the process of the thing itself, the practice seems to be dying off, given the increasing rate of urbanization, the cash economy, and I think globalization, and also the fact that now providing for these women is becoming, especially children, becomes too much expensive. So the practice somehow dies off. But of course, it is still ingrained in some other parts of Africa, in most parts of Africa. And so it's the thing. And now what happens here is that this is not as much as it's very much admired. Polygamous marriages and families don't seem to have to be a bed of roses. So women and children, who are the lesser members of society, according to patriarchy, are subjected to all aspects of violence, and domestic abuse, and violence, and so on and so forth. So the example here, for example, you have Baba Segil, who treats his women, his wives, and even children with an iron fist, iron hand. So he beats them at the slightest provocation. At one time, he mercilessly beats his own wife, of course, after the death of his male child. And again, maybe the question would have been, if this child who died was a female, probably the story was going to be different altogether. And then you have Taju, the driver to Babasegi, who also senselessly slaps his wife almost at the slightest provocation, and he seems to revel so much into doing such an abominous act. And so we're also told that there is a male senator who slaps a female colleague. You can imagine a male senator. I'm very sure my senior friend Scott knows senators. So a senator in Uganda, it could be the equivalent of a member of parliament or even a minister. So be a male and slaps, and he seems to joke over it, and it doesn't seem to arise so much uproar and so on and so forth. It's like beating a woman in this particular society is seen as something that is very common and shouldn't send any shockwaves to anyone. And of course, we also find so we also find aspects of patriarchy in this particular society, where you have I'm just trying to organize my so the other part of patriarchal subjugation of women, and I think also women, girls and boys, is in the idea, the objectification and commodification of women and children. And here you have both wives and children are treated as almost being next to the property of the man, of the father, of the husband. For example, Bolanli, the young graduate now, and I think Babasegi's recent wife, young wife, is seen more not really as a woman, but sort of like as a trophy. So this now becomes an object of envy by every man. She becomes a sense of admiration, and this admiration takes almost the condescending part, because if you are a married woman and people know you're married to another man, why should everyone now start thinking probably they should have been theirs, and so on and so forth. So the lack of respect. So women are only treated as commodities and objects, and women also are reduced to mere reproductive gadgets and domestic servants for the best interest of the man in this home. So a woman is simply a common other, the norm, I think, like Simon de Beauvoir would say, is the man. So the woman here in this particular patriarchal society is projected. The woman is going to be important and in quotes, in as much as how she's going to engage in acts of production and also as a domestic servant, of course, from where she doesn't get any respect. So there is the respect or status earned through childbearing and the implication on those who do not have children. Now, the problem, as we're going to find, is that Bolanli is unable to have a child, and even when it is later revealed that it is the problem of the man, the blame, of course, is on the man, the woman. So the patriarchy, as Shonayen presents, doesn't seem to suggest that a man can make mistakes, or a man could lack anything, and so on and so forth. So whatever happens in society, the first person to be blamed is ultimately going to be a woman, and this is essentially what happens in this particular text. And also, women are held in a very low regard or esteem, and they are subjected to ritual murders by men who want money. There is, of course, a story in which one of the men is going to kill so many women almost for sport. Of course, later on, he'll be arrested, but it seems to be coming much later on. So there have always been child murders. So women are seen as sort of like fetishes through which someone can get money and then become wealthy. And that doesn't cause uproar. We only see one instance in the text where, but of course, there seems to be a suggestion that this probably seems to be a norm in the wider part of Nigeria. In 2017 here, we had a problem of women murders in many parts of Ghana, especially in the capital. And there was, I think, one very chilling and heart-wrenching story about when a very young and beautiful girl was abducted, and then the father was asked to pay money. Even when he paid a huge bounty, the child was just the girl was later on was found dead and brutally killed. So most patriarchal societies don't seem to actually value the life of women, and so the regard is very low. And then, of course, you have the traditional beliefs on gender, especially when it comes to the question of children. Now, as much as children in Africa and most African societies are very much respected, because children are seen as, the bearers of, the continuation of the generation, and so the generation will always continue in those children. But there is always that gender-based disparity in which these children are viewed. For example, a male child is given more primacy compared to the female child. The female child is always seen as someone who will grow up and at some point get married and then not probably make any substantial contribution to society. So there is always that traditional belief on gender in which primacy is given on the male gender as opposed, of course, to the male gender. And then, of course, the power dynamics and authority, in which, of course, the husband wields excessive power, sort of like an restrained power. Babasegi is seen as almost a godly figure. He dictates proceedings. He can marry anyone he wants. He doesn't seem to be this very well. He's got the money and he seems to look very well after his family. But he's very old, especially when you compare him with his wives. And the manner in which he's described, we are told every time he goes to the toilet and he farts. This very weird personality, but who can marry any woman he wants. So the woman doesn't have a say in that particular part. It's always the man who wields the power. And how Babasegi, for example, dominates his family, answers questions on behalf of Bonan. So when, for example, they go to the market, when they go to the hospital, because at some point they will decide to go to the hospital and find out why Bolanli is not able to give child, to bear children. And when they reach there, the doctors are asking Bolanli, which normally should be the common procedure, but Babasegi thinks he should answer on behalf of the woman. So the woman does not probably know how to answer questions, even when the questions are directed, and the woman actually will be the one to offer the right answers to the questions posed. But this is going to be answered by the man, because the man feels like the woman is a known entity, the woman is part of him, and the woman belongs to him. So that patriarchal part of it, in which women are seen as an extension of the man, which is, of course, a bigger debate right from the days of the Bible and in the classical scholarship and in many parts of these other areas. I'm sure in India probably you grapple with similar challenges about women. And so those are some of the few instances. Of course, there are so many others in which there is a manifestation of gross patriarchal oppression of the female gender, of course, perpetrated by men and the entire idea. So now, the major idea is it suggests that in as much as there is this patriarchy and the subjugation of women, these women later on fight back. So there is some bit of agency in which they decide now enough is too much. And this is done whether consciously or subconsciously they engage in acts that ultimately now bring the whole concept of this exploitative patriarchal system come tumbling down. So the subversion or overthrow of patriarchy, how does it fall? How does it go tumbling down? So although the patriarchal code is firmly rooted in the world of the novel, I argue that Sonaeni's novel offers, among others, an intriguing depiction of the African female agency, whose dexterous subversion of the patriarchal structure not only emasculates chauvinistic man, but also proves ruthless in its oppression of fellow women, especially co-wives. So I think maybe that's the irony in here. So women are going to fight back, they will come up together, or they will even engage in acts which later on will prove that patriarchy must come down tumbling. The problem is that this doesn't only wrestle the patriarchal system, but it also has an effect on fellow women, especially the co-wives and probably also the female children. And I'm using the phrase, the downfall or overthrow of patriarchy, to basically mean the various instances in the novel in which patriarchal man can no longer act as he desires without accruing serious reproach or consequences. And so that's what is now happening here. So man has got the power. Babasegi will dictate proceedings, but I think there are acts which will definitely bring him down. And towards the end of the story, we see now a very pitiable, a very pathetic, a fallen man, and so on and so a laughable figure. Maybe someone even much more sympathetic. Someone, I don't know whether we sympathize with him, but I think someone whom we now sort of like realize, oh, after all, you are human, and so on and so forth. So those instances in which now patriarchy is brought tumbling now include, among others, for example, man's arrest for the murder of women and other crimes. So in as much as James Jerome, who of course now is engaged in the ritual murders of these women so that he gets money, he's going to do that probably for some time, but at some point now he'll be arrested and no longer becomes, he loses that, undue power to kill people and value women's lives and property and so on and so forth. And also one of the men in Aikara, of course, that's the place where Babasegi goes early in the morning when he realizes he has issues in his marriage, and Branley can no longer now get for him a child. He goes to that particular part. Because it's a male world, there are only male characters in there, and the women seem to play part in the background. And so what happens there is that at some point, when he makes it clear that the woman blandly has failed to conceive and give him a child, so there are suggestions, including some who say he should simply drag her to the herbalist. So I think again the idea Africans believe in this particular novel, that if there are issues in the family, maybe if there are marriage issue problems, then maybe there should be some people to go to, maybe witch doctors, herbalists. They should be able to give a solution to that, and we're going to find that is going to be contested by the modern and educated Bolanley. But when he goes in there, the women, the other men are even shocked that Babasegi is even discussing this with a woman. The suggestion is that he should simply drag this woman to this herbalist so that they get a solution. But one of them actually realizes that abusing a woman is a very risky undertaking, which might actually lead to to imprisonment. So in that case, this idea that women can be mistreated and so on and so forth, we now see attempts at mitigating that through imprisoning offenders and perpetrators of the victims, perpetrators of the subjugation of women, and that we see in that case, patriarchy seems to be coming down to crumble because women seem to be feared. In as much as men would want to beat their women, they fear that the hand of the law might take its own course and it might dawn on man, and that might not end very well. And of course, also the other instances we find the educated blandly rubbishes herbalists and prophets as conmen, and as a consequence, Babasege has yielded to her demands in modern medicine as a way of finding out about barrenness. So this is very interesting because this is a male world, but we're also going to see the irony of femininity. The fact is, Babasege loves this beautiful graduate. He looks at her as a trophy, and at some point, actually, even the mistreatment he subjects to her is not probably intended. I think sometimes it happens simply because he's maybe a man behaving in a world which gives men undue influence. But from his heart of hearts, he really loves this young woman. He's so proud of her that even when he gets that bad counsel from friends, he simply listens to her. And one instance now we see the suggestion that men who have issues in their marriages, they should go and seek redress in, for example, herbalists or witch doctors is now forsaken. And now we see a patriarchal man, a predominantly traditional Babasege, actually yield to the demands of a modern educated woman. Instead of going to find faults in her, especially in a traditional setup in which probably the favor might end up to the man's side, they decide now to go to a hospital to meet a gynecologist to find out exactly what the problem is. And indeed, when they get there, we're going to find out that the problem is not the woman, the problem is the man. And we will see a very emasculated Babasege in a patriarchal society that comes now tumbling down with him. And then, of course, the educated, although polygamy is the prominent form of marriage, it's actually resisted and despised by Bolanli's mother and sister. So the idea here is that in as much as women engage in acts of polygamy, it looks like it is something they wouldn't get in if they had a chance. Now we see here a woman, for example, from Bolanli's family, the fact that she's even able to go to university in a predominantly traditional society, it suggests that in most cases, these are some of the differences under patriarchy, where you find societies which are probably poor. I think the marginalization of women become actually very much pronounced, as opposed to societies where maybe people have money. The marginalization is going to be there, but it's not going to be as pronounced as what we would expect in a family where there is no man at all. So in this particular family of Bolanli, the mother and the sister did not actually buy into polygamy. In fact, they called polygamy as something which is for gold diggers, for materialistic women, I think, and also for bush dwellers, those who maybe traditional people or people who have not really seen the world that much, and so on and so forth. So they have no respect. In fact, the mother is not happy that this child is actually going to get married to another man, to a man who already is married to 3 other wives. The woman is very annoyed and she feels very much upset. So there is that questioning. So this idea, in as much as polygamy is a major facet of a patriarchal traditional society in Africa, I think there are resistances to it, and it looks like, according to the way Shoneni presents it here, if women had the ways, for example, if you had very many mothers of Babasege, you have an option. People choose actually monogamy over polygamy because they look at it as something which is not really good for example, if someone has gone to school, maybe that's not the best marriage you should get engaged in. And we also see the barrenness, or or infertility of men that make their wives cheat on them and even divorce on them. So, in as much as in patriarchy, the presumption here is that men have everything, they can do whatever they want. But there are also instances where, for example, when they are barren, when they are infertile, when they are impotent, and sometimes even when they are very poor and they can't be able to provide for their families, it becomes a very complicated thing altogether. And so we see, for example, Baba Segi is going to be very arrogant, very proud. He is going to say things, but when he finds out finally that actually the problem is not Bolandi, it is him who has no sperm count, who is barren, who is infertile, and that most important, all the children he has, because now a DNA is taken, they take now an examination and they find out, I think by DNA test, that all the children of these other three wives, Iyasegi, Iyatope, and Iyafemi, none of them actually belongs to Baba Segi. And so we see a very emasculated man, a man no more, and the way he tries sort of like to negotiate. So it's now him negotiating and not the women, telling them that these are, well, he can keep with them. They could even keep there, and it looks like it might even change. And you could suggest that, for example, if the story ran on, maybe we would find Baba Segi a much more emasculated man than we see him in the initial stages and towards the climax of the novel. So in as much as men have this power, this unlimited power, I think the power seems to be limited when, for example, you are barren, when you are infertile, and maybe when you are unable to provide for your family. And that's one way we see this patriarchy failing down and stumbling. And then we have Bolanley at some point even returns to the clinic for examination without telling her husband. I think there is the idea here is that according to Shonain, that women who have gone to school probably will wrestle down this patriarchy. They will question things. They will try to negotiate their ways, and they will always they will fight for their rights and things. So even when this man saw so much authoritative in this society, in this family, the other man still knows. Probably she's aware that if she's abused, she can go to court and probably sue her husband, and maybe she might get some bit of justice, and so on and so forth. So we find her doing things that the other women do not actually do because probably they have not gone to school, they probably don't know their rights, they have simply been subjected into thinking that all that is required of them is simply being there to appease the husband, no matter the suffering and subjugation they go through. So as I come to the conclusion of my presentation, this is very interesting. It's very important for us to take note of here. In this study, I just set up to say that much of Africa, the societies, I think, is patriarchal, and that this patriarchy is very much oppressive to women. But even when in the midst of this oppression and subjugation, women also have some bit of agency, so they actually come up and topple down the system, and of course given manifestation on the various patriarchal oppressions and also instances in which this patriarchy is no more. So I would like to conclude as follows. I feel like Lola Shonaini's The Secret Lives of Baba Segi's Wives is a novel that aptly depicts man's delusion with patriarchal privilege and power, and the heart-wrenching circumstance in which he finds himself after realizing, albeit of course too late, that the very system he has been clinging on to marginalize others, because here includes men, women and children, and maybe probably lesser men who probably haven't made it in life, becomes the very basis of his downfall. So the author seems to suggest that the patriarchy is no match for modern education and medicine. So from modernity of course comes with education, it comes with legislation, it comes with the modern medicine, and maybe that's where if those ones are promoted, then patriarchy probably can't be anymore. So I want to thank you so much for giving me this opportunity to present this. And I want to thank you so much for being a very wonderful audience. And I want to conclude on that. Thank you, and thank you so much. And I'll be willing to answer questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Julius, for your thought-provoking presentation. Your insights will undoubtedly inspire and inform our discussions throughout this conference. So, any questions or comments on Julius? Anyone? I think we are all clear, and it's pretty relevant for us. And with that, we conclude the inaugural session of this conference, and I'm sure you've enjoyed the welcome address and the keynote